Good afternoon to all of you. Hope I'm audible for everyone. First of all, let me extend a very warm welcome to all of you for joining with us for the webinar on State of the Sri Lankan Economy, Challenges and Outlook as reflected in Central Bank Annual Report 2020. This webinar is organized by the Center for Bank Studies of Central Bank with the collaboration of Economic Research Department of Central Bank. Now, this webinar is currently being telecasted via Zoom and also via Central Bank's official Facebook page. So participants can interact with us and send us your questions through the Q&A option in Zoom. And if you are joining via Facebook, you can write your questions as comments in the Facebook post. Those are the simple technical matters I have to mention from this end. Now, without taking much time, let me invite Dr. PKG Harishchandra, Additional Director of Economic Research Department of Central Bank, who will take over the session from this point onward and moderate it. Dr. Harishchandra, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Sushan, and very good afternoon to you all. Welcome to the webinar on the Central Bank Annual Report for the year 2020. Let me share with you the format of this webinar today. First, Governor will do the opening remarks, followed by the presentation on the state of the Sri Lankan economy, challenges and outlook as reflected in the annual report 2020 by Director of Economic Research. The presentation will take about an hour or so, and then the floor will open for questions, and we'll have about 30 to 40 minutes for questions. Please note that as Kushan already mentioned, we will take only type-in questions, not voice questions in the interest of time. And the viewers can pose questions during the presentation as well, using the chat and Q&A options on Zoom and the CBSL Facebook page as well. So your questions will be responded by the panel today, chaired by Governor Deshamane Professor W. Lakshman, and comprising Deputy Governors, Mr. Mahinda Silwadana, Mrs. Yvette Fernando, and Mr. Dhammika Nanayakara, Assistant Governor, Mr. Rona Wijayasekara, and Director of Economic Research, Dr. Chandranath Amarasekara. So with that, let me kindly invite Governor to begin the webinar. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Harishchandra. Good afternoon to you all. Let me cordially welcome all of you for this webinar today. This is the second consecutive year in which we are holding a webinar. We are presenting the Central Bank Annual Report in the form of a webinar. Both occasions, last year, this year, this happened because of the restrictions imposed upon us by the pandemic. As you are aware by now, the Central Bank of Sri Lanka published the Annual Report 2020 on the 30th of April 2021, after submitting it to the Honorable Prime Minister and Minister of Finance in compliance with the Monetary Law Act. The annual report is the flagship publication of the Central Bank and presents economic developments of the year under review, along with an analysis of the economic outlook in the medium term, as well as a review of issues and challenges that the economy faces and have to be addressed in fostering sustainable and high economic growth in the period ahead. I believe that it is not an exaggeration to say that economic management has never been more challenging than during 2020 in the entire post-independence history of Sri Lanka. The government and the central bank had to deploy almost all the tools at their disposal to steer the economy through very difficult and totally unfamiliar circumstances amidst this pandemic. The annual report 2020 showcases the nature of the issues faced by the economy and how the government, the central bank, and other stakeholders of the country, of the economy, contributed to minimize, to the best possible extent, the damage caused by the pandemic on businesses and individuals under extremely trying circumstances. Sri Lanka has been able to contain the devastating impact of COVID-19 on lives, livelihoods, and welfare of the people through a well-coordinated approach of public policy making. As you may have already read in the annual report, the Sri Lankan economy bounced back strongly in the second half of 2020, despite the contraction in the first half of the year and the disruptions caused by the second wave, which started somewhere around October. External sector demonstrated resilience, underpinned by timely and proactive policy measures, as reflected in a notable improvement in the external current account, among other indicators. Monetary policy on the central bank responded promptly in complementing the fiscal policy measures to keep the businesses afloat amid the pandemic by ensuring adequate liquidity in the markets at affordable costs. Meanwhile, the central bank provided much needed financial assistance to the government under challenging global financial market conditions, while not compromising the core objectives of the central bank. Further, the central bank implemented various measures to secure financial system stability and to reinforce public confidence in the financial system. Governments all over the world worked under extreme conditions due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the associated catastrophic financial burden stemming from its economic fallout. The government of Sri Lanka too had to face headwinds, yet remain committed to ensuring the smooth functioning of public services, while also providing relief to the affected people and businesses. Despite the limited fiscal space under most trying circumstances, notwithstanding the decline in government revenue and unexpected expenses due to the pandemic, the government honored all debt servicing obligations that became due thus far, both in terms of foreign and domestic financing. The annual report was finalized before the third wave of COVID-19. Once again, escalated uncertainties domestically as well as globally. At the time of finalizing the annual report, we began to see positive spillovers of the policy measures that have been put in place. Activity was returning to normalcy very rapidly. It was under those circumstances the central bank report, which we are reviewing, has been written. The outlook for the tradable sector looked promising as the world economy was recovering fast, as highlighted by global agencies. Private sector credit gathered pace, thereby supplementing the domestic capital formation needed to catalyze the novel growth model of the government. The third wave of the pandemic has highlighted the considerable degree of risk surrounding the economic outlook due to the extremely unpredictable nature of the pandemic. This demands continuous and coordinated efforts by policymakers and other stakeholders to mitigate the hardships caused by the pandemic to the people, businesses, as well as the entire economy. In that endeavor, the central bank and the government remain committed to supporting the individuals and firms, as we have demonstrated already since the first wave, and very well described in the annual report. We hope that the pandemic-related uncertainties will subside soon, enabling the economy to move along the projected macroeconomic path for 2021 and beyond, while gradually improving the macro fundamentals of the economy. With these comments, I end my remarks, inviting the Director of Economic Research to begin his presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. I hope all of you can see my slides, and let me start my presentation by highlighting the statutory requirement in the Monetary Law Act that within 4 months after the end of each financial year, the Monetary Board should submit to the Minister in charge of the subject of finance and shall publish an annual report on the condition of the central bank and a review of the policies and measures adopted by the Monetary Board during the financial year, and an analysis of the economic and financial circumstances which prompted those policies and measures. And as Governor stated, we have submitted the 71st annual report of the Monetary Board for the year 2020 to the Honorable Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance on the 30th of April. And on the same day, we have released it to the web in the 3 languages, English, Sinhala, and Tamil. And I'm sure the publication will be available for sale as well as soon as possible. So if I take you through the contents of the annual report, for the past 3 years, the annual report has been presented in 2 volumes. Volume 1 has what we call Part 1, which is the state of the economy, its performance, policies and issues, and also 146 statistical appendices are shown, and 13 special statistical appendices are also presented in Part 1. In Volume 2, we have 3 parts: accounts and operations of the central bank, and administrative measures adopted by the government and the Monetary Board during the year, and also legislative enactments of 2020. And in 2020, we did not have legislative enactments directly related to the functions and operations of the central bank and banking institutions. So we have given a list of the enactments passed by the Parliament in general in the annual report. So let me take you through Part 1, which is state of the economy, its performance, policies, and issues. And in this part, we present the state of the economy in 8 chapters, and I will take you through each of those chapters. So if you look at, so let me take you through the 8 chapters of the annual report one by one. And in the first chapter, as Governor stated, our key message has been that the complex challenges encountered by the Sri Lankan economy in 2020 were efficaciously addressed through extraordinary policy interventions by the government and the central bank. And these interventions were essential to mitigate the socio-economic impact of the spillovers of the COVID-19 pandemic and the resultant scarring of households and enterprises. And also such interventions were required to uphold the confidence in the economy, thereby averting acute stresses on macroeconomic and financial system stability. That is our key message in Chapter 1. And if you think of the state of the Sri Lankan economy at the turn of 2020, we know that after having to suffer the devastating effects of the ISIS under attacks and a volatile political environment in the year 2019, the Sri Lankan economy was on a path to recovery at the onset of 2020. And also improved political stability towards end 2019 led to a notable rise in sentiments, as you can see in the LMD Nielsen's Business Confidence Index, which is shown here. At the beginning of 2020, the challenges that the government and the central bank had was to revive the economy after several years of low growth. And also, because of that, both the government and the central bank directed policies towards reviving the economy. If you take fiscal policy was aimed at supporting businesses and growth, even at the expense of lower revenue. And from the central bank side, the accommodative monetary policy was expected to continue to support growth given the low inflation environment. However, as we know, the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic and the related containment measures caused severe difficulties to all stakeholders of the economy and the process of economic recovery. And the government and the central bank took a multitude of policy and operational measures to combat the pandemic and its repercussions. They were health and community-based measures, and also monetary, financial, and several other measures as well. So with these extraordinary policy interventions, the complex challenges in 2020 were addressed to a great extent. If you think of the first and the second waves of COVID-19 pandemic, we know that they were managed successfully with comparatively less fatalities. And also both the public and private sectors adopted work from home practices, improving resilience against the resurgence of the pandemic. And businesses and individuals were able to weather challenges due to debt moratoria, improved access to low-cost financing, as well as the low tax environment. And the economy began to show strong signs of recovery during the second half of 2020, in spite of the disruptions to the recovery process caused by the second wave during the final quarter of the year. However, we know that significant macroeconomic challenges lie ahead. If I summarize a few, managing the resurgence of the pandemic and its economic fallout is key, and also managing the sizable external debt service payments amidst limited foreign currency inflows is another, and strengthening the domestic economy through far-reaching reforms is something that we look forward to, and also managing the timely rollback of fiscal and monetary support once the recovery process firms up is another challenge that will face us in the period ahead. So this chart, this slide summarizes what went on in the Sri Lankan economy in 2020. It's given in 4 quarters. The top left quarter is about the real economy. Top right is about the external sector. Bottom right is about the fiscal sector, and the bottom left is about the monetary and financial sectors. So if I take you through those 4 quarters, in 2020, the real GDP, Sri Lanka's real GDP contracted by 3.6%. And that was the second contraction that the Sri Lanka has seen in terms of real GDP growth since independence. The first contraction being 1.5% contraction in the year 2001. And we also saw investment expenditure declining, but national savings declined at a slower pace. So the savings investment gap contracted to 1.4% in 2020 compared to 2.1% in the previous year. And we saw net external demand contracting, and unemployment also, with this contraction in real GDP, unemployment also increased to 5.5% from 4.8% in the previous year. In terms of inflation, headline inflation was broadly within the desired range, and core inflation remained low. And as we will discuss later, food inflation was a serious concern throughout the year. if you look at per capita GDP in US dollar terms, Sri Lanka saw its per capita GDP declining for the third consecutive year. And in 2020, per capita GDP was at 3,682 US dollars compared to 3,852 US dollars in the previous year. If you look at the external sector, we saw a reduction in merchandise exports, but at the same time, the merchandise imports reduced more than the reduction in merchandise exports. So this resulted in an improvement in the trade deficit. And we saw devastating impact, devastating impact on the tourism sector, although workers' remittances recorded a notable recovery. And then we also observed foreign direct investment inflows moderating and portfolio outflows continuing. So with all these, the rupee depreciated during the year, but the depreciation was contained at 2.6% in 2020. And official reserves at the end of 2020 were estimated at US dollars 5.7 billion compared to US dollars 7.6 billion at the end of 2019. Looking at the fiscal sector, the budget deficit has been estimated at 11.1% by the Ministry of Finance. And as we know, access to foreign financing was constrained amidst unfavorable global financial market conditions and also downgrades of Sri Lanka's rating by sovereign rating agencies. We observed the outstanding central government debt rising to 101% of GDP from 86.8% of GDP in 2019. And the relative share of outstanding foreign debt to total central government debt declined to 40% from 47.6% in the previous year. Moving very quickly to the monetary sector, a key highlight, the key highlight in the monetary sector was that policy rates were reduced by 250 basis points drastically, and also pumping ample liquidity to the market so that the businesses, individuals, as well as the financial sector, in addition to the government, would have enough funds to cope with this COVID, the impact of the COVID pandemic. And with these, market interest rates declined to historic low levels, and we will discuss those in the slides that you will see in a little while. And we saw broad money growth accelerating with private sector credit increasing, as well as credit to the public sector increasing. And also the central bank took several measures to ensure the maintenance of financial system stability. So that is the summary, overall summary of the Sri Lankan economy in 2020. So if I take you through very quickly chapters 2, 3, and 4, which cover the real side of the economy. And as I said before, the Sri Lankan economy contracted in 2020, reflecting the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the first chart here shows the quarterly economic performance. And in the first quarter, there was a contraction of 1.8%. We know that the COVID effect commenced locally in mid-March, but globally, it was there for some time. And in the second quarter, the economic contraction was estimated by the Department of Census and Statistics at 16.4%. And by the third quarter, contrary to expectations, the Sri Lankan economy started recovering very rapidly. And 1.3% growth was recorded. But unfortunately, in the fourth quarter, the second wave of COVID affected the economy. But still, the economy recorded a growth of 1.3% in real terms. If you look at the performance of the three key sectors of the economy, agriculture, industry, and services, you see that with regard to agriculture, there were achievements. The paddy production recorded a bumper harvest for the second consecutive year, and also growing of vegetables, growing of cereals except rice, growing of fruits. There were growth rates recorded in terms of the performance of those. But several sectors in the within agriculture were affected: fishing, and tea, and the animal production as well. In the industry sector, the contraction was a result of subdued performance in construction and manufacture of textiles and apparel, and so on. But we saw a growth in manufacture of food, beverages, and tobacco products. And in the services sector, the financial services and auxiliary financial services performed well. And we also know that telecom sector, as well as wholesale and retail trade, had some positive growth recorded in 2020. But transportation of goods and passenger services, other personal services, accommodation, food and beverages services sectors were severely affected due to the COVID pandemic. So overall, if you think of the three major sectors of the economy, all three sectors recorded contractions. The agriculture, forestry, and fishing contracted by 2.4%, industry by 6.9%, and services by 1.5%. And with this, the economy, the real GDP contraction was 3.6%. And if you think of the contribution to GBA, we see that the agriculture sector contributed 7.7%, industry sector 27.9%, and services sector 64.4%. Looking at the expenditure approach of GDP, we see that investment expenditure as well as net external demand weakened, while consumption expenditure grew marginally in 2020. So investment expenditure, or what we call gross capital formation, registered a contraction of 5.5% in 2019 and a further 6.2% in 2020. And net external demand for goods and services contracted by 3.5%. And consumption expenditure recorded an increase of 2.1% in 2020. Also, we saw public savings, private savings growing by 10%, although domestic savings as a percentage of GDP declined to 18.9% in 2020 from 20.7% in 2019. So this decline in domestic savings was a result of public savings that was recorded in 2020. But as we know, it was this public saving that actually contributed to the increased consumption expenditure, while private savings also grew during the year. And the national savings as a percentage of GDP declined to 23.9% in 2020. But the increased net current transfers from abroad, or essentially workers' remittances, resulted in the savings investment gap narrowing during the year to 1.4% of GDP. Moving on very quickly to unemployment, reflecting subdued economic activity amidst the COVID outbreak, unemployment increased to 5.5% in 2020 from 4.8% in the previous year. And this was amidst a decline in labor force participation rate. So in 2020, the labor force participation rate declined to 50.6% from the previous year's 52.3%. And the employed population decreased to 7.999 million in 2020 from 8.181 million in 2019. And moving on to the economic and social overheads of the country, we know that the provision of health services was carried out amidst COVID-19 challenges. And as we know, although Sri Lanka faced severe challenges in containing the two waves of the outbreak, collaborative action of the health sector and other stakeholders, both in the private and public sectors, enabled the country to maintain the caseload at manageable level during 2020. And if you take the statistics at end 2020 with regard to the COVID cases, there were 43,299 positive cases, and the fatality rate was 0.47%. But this has changed dramatically by the end of March 2020, where the statistics that we have in the annual report. There were 92,706 cumulative positive cases, with a fatality rate of 0.61%. And by yesterday, this has increased to 125,906 positive cases and a fatality rate of 0.64%. We also know that in 2020, the public health system pursued innovative efforts to meet the needs of the NCD patients amidst the COVID-19 related restrictions, and the full support of the private sector was also given to those efforts. Moving on to the education services, we know that the government continued to provide education services under unprecedented challenges. And there were school and university closures from March 2020 onwards. And the longest periods of closures were seen in the Western province. And several innovative initiatives were undertaken to facilitate the continuity of educational activities, such as the e-Taksalawa, Guru Gedara, and learning management system in relation to universities. And also, we know that while the rapid transition of educational activities to digital platforms is appreciable, there have been many concerns raised about the effectiveness of such initiatives, especially among children from low-income families, those living in remote areas, and students having limited access to ICT facilities, as well as those with various learning difficulties. And as we have done in the past several years, in the annual report this time also, we have highlighted that there is an urgent need for the education sector to work with key public and private industry stakeholders to identify the labor market needs of the economy and focus on upskilling and reskilling efforts. Moving very quickly on to the other measures taken by the government, we know that government took several measures to uplift the socioeconomic well-being of low-income and vulnerable households during the lockdown. The government provided an allowance of 5,000 rupees per vulnerable household in 2 rounds, and the main welfare programs continued during 2020 as well. And the government continued its efforts to ensure the provision of clean and safe drinking water to the entire population. And by the end of 2020, access to safe drinking water has increased to 93.2% from 91.9% at the end of 2019. And we don't have updated data on poverty yet. We still rely on the 2016 Household Income and Expenditure Survey, and we expect the Department of Census and Statistics to come up with updated poverty indices soon. But as you can see from the map, there are poverty pockets that has to be addressed. This is true on provincial basis, district basis, as well as Grama Niladhari division basis. If you look at the telecom sector proactively adapted to the challenges posed by the pandemic. And we know that this sector facilitated all other sectors, particularly through improved provision of services to facilitate work from home arrangements, both for workers as well as the students and teachers. And by the end of 2020, telephone penetration was at 143%, and internet penetration, including mobile connections, was at 79.9%. And as you can see from the chart on the right-hand side, there was a tremendous growth in terms of broadband data usage during the first wave of the pandemic, as well as the second wave of the pandemic. And we are right now also, we are seeing this trend continuing. And talking about energy, the nationwide lockdown during the second quarter of the year caused a significant reduction in the demand for energy, but this gradually returned to pre-pandemic levels thereafter. And during the year, the crude oil price, Brent crude oil price, declined by 32.3% on average to US dollars 43.35 per barrel, compared to US dollars 64.04 per barrel in the previous year. And the lowest crude oil price since 2000 was recorded in mid-April 2020. And during the year, sales volumes of petroleum products in the domestic market contracted by 16.8%. And total electricity generation registered a decline of 1.3% during the year. And also electricity sales registered a decline of 2.2% during the year, largely due to the reduced demand from industrial sector that outweighed the growth in demand from the domestic sector. If you look at transport activities and port operations, you see subdued activities in terms of road transport, rail transport, aviation, and also performance of port activities as well. And moving on to physical infrastructure development, despite disruptions caused by the pandemic, several physical infrastructure projects progressed during 2020. These included the highway projects, as well as development activities in the in relation to the Colombo Port City project. And we saw construction activities of external utility supply services were under progress during 2020, and also preliminary work on the construction of the financial and commercial center commenced during the year. Moving on to inflation, headline inflation remained broadly within the desired range of 4 to 6% during 2020, and core inflation remained low throughout the year. And subdued demand conditions, well-anchored inflation expectations, and downward revisions to administered prices helped maintain inflation at the targeted level, although there was upward pressure from food inflation, particularly due to the elevated prices of essential food items and also supply disruptions due to the pandemic. Headline inflation, as measured by the CCPI, decelerated and was recorded at 4.2% by the end of 2020, compared to 4.8% at the end of 2019. And national CPI-based headline inflation decelerated to 4.6% by the end of 2020, compared to 6.2% recorded at the end of 2019. We saw NCPI-based headline inflation being higher than the Colombo CPI-based headline inflation, particularly in the first half of the year, because of the higher weight on food items in the national CPI compared to the Colombo CPI. And core inflation remained subdued throughout the year as per the CCPI as well as the NCPI. And if you look at the chart on the right-hand side, you see food inflation being quite high compared to headline inflation or non-food inflation that we observed in 2020. Moving on to chapter 5, or the external sector developments and policies. Again, our key message in this chapter is that, supported by timely measures undertaken by the government and the central bank, the external sector battled strong headwinds in 2020. We saw earnings from exports declining by 15.9% to US dollars 10 billion in 2000. But we also saw export earnings rebounding within a relatively short span of time to reach pre-pandemic levels. There were reductions recorded in terms of garment exports as well as petroleum products, although there were increases in exports shown in terms of PPE and some agricultural exports. And the United States continued to be the main buyer of Sri Lanka's exports, followed by the UK and India. The US bought 25% of our merchandise exports. When you look at imports, a key highlight in 2020 were the restrictions on imports that were placed during the year for obvious reasons. And those measures to curtail non-essential imports, together with the significantly lower global petroleum prices, helped reduce the import expenditure in 2020. I said that earnings from exports declined by 15.9%. Import expenditure declined by 19.5% to 16.1 billion in 2020. This was the lowest level of imports that we observed since the year 2010. And lower imports were led by fuel, textiles and textile articles, and also personal vehicles. But there were increases recorded in oils and fats imports, sugar and confectionery imports, and medical and pharmaceutical imports. And China was the key import source, with 22% of our imports coming from China, and then India with 19%, and also the United Arab Emirates 6%. And with these developments, a notable improvement in the trade deficit was recorded. Basically, exports were recorded at 10 billion US dollars, and imports were recorded at 16.1 billion US dollars. And the trade deficit declined by almost 2 billion US dollars from the previous year to record US dollars 6 billion during the year 2020. So there was an improvement in the trade account, and also the external current account improved with the improvement in the trade account, as well as the better than expected performance in workers' remittances and also IT BPO services. But the impact on tourism was a severe blow on the external current account during 2020. If I give you the statistics, in 2019, Sri Lanka earned US dollars 3.6 billion from tourism. In 2020, this declined to US dollars 0.7 billion, just 700 million. But the IT BPO exports, according to the statistics that we have, improved to about US dollars 1 billion, and workers' remittances increased to US dollars 7.1 billion from the previous year's 6.7 billion. And with these, the current account deficit narrowed to 1.3% of GDP from 2.2% of GDP in the previous year. The small difference from the savings investment gap, which was recorded at 1.4%, is due to the statistical errors and timing differences. And when you look at the financial account of the balance of payments, you see that there were the major inflows to the financial account included the loan from the China Development Bank obtained by the government of US dollars 500 million, and the SAARC Finance FOP facility of US dollars 400 million from the Reserve Bank of India, which has been settled now, and also inflows on account of FDIs, which amounted to US dollars 670 million. The FDI inflows were much lower than the previous year for obvious reasons, but the overall inflow was recorded at US dollars 670 million. And the major outflows from the financial account included the outflows of foreign investment from the rupee-denominated government securities market, and also the settlement of the maturing ISBs of $1 billion in October 2020. And with these developments, the balance of payments recorded a deficit of $2.3 billion compared to a marginal surplus of $0.4 billion in 2019. And the gross official reserves declined amidst foreign debt service payments and limited foreign exchange inflows. But still, by the end of 2020, Sri Lanka had an official reserve of $5.7 billion, which was sufficient to cover 4.2 months of imports. And at the end of 2019, the corresponding statistics were at $7.6 billion of reserves and 4.6 months of imports. You may notice that although reserves have declined by about 1.9 billion during the year, months of import cover has declined less than that because of the reduced imports that we saw in 2020. And Sri Lanka's total outstanding external debt declined in 2020. This is a controversial topic, but let me try to explain. The external debt stock declined in 2020 mainly due to several reasons. The repayment of the ISB of $1 billion that matured in 2020, and then the reduction in outstanding foreign loans obtained by the government, the decline in non-resident holding of rupee-denominated government securities, the increase in the resident holdings of Sri Lanka's outstanding ISBs, and also the significant decline in market prices of Sri Lanka's outstanding sovereign bonds. As we know, with the rating downgrades and the global developments, there was a significant decline in market prices of Sri Lanka's outstanding sovereign bonds. And as per the international standards, this has been accounted for in our external debt statistics during the year 2020. And this has been the practice that we've followed in the past several years as well. So accordingly, the total external debt stock at the end of 2020 was recorded at $49.2 billion. That was 60.9% of GDP compared to $54.8 billion at the end of 2019, which was 65.3% of GDP. And despite the challenges in mobilizing external financing, Sri Lanka continued to maintain its unblemished record of debt servicing. I should relate to the central government debt statistics given in Chapter 6 of the annual report as well. There we have recorded the face value of sovereign ISBs, Sri Lanka ISBs, although in external debt statistics, we have recorded the sovereign bond liability in terms of market price. Looking at the exchange rate movements, we saw that there was severe pressure on the exchange rate during the March-April 2020 period, as well as in late 2020. And these significant volatilities in the exchange rate were prevented with timely measures. And during the year, the depreciation of the rupee against the US dollar was contained at 2.6%. And the central bank also absorbed about $300 million on net basis from the domestic foreign exchange market. And in terms of the real effective exchange rate movements, which you see on the right-hand side chart, we observed that the RIA indices remained well below the base year level, indicating the external competitiveness of the country, at least in terms of the exchange rate. And Chapter 6 of the annual report explains the fiscal policy and government finance. And when compiling this chapter, we depend on the information provided to us, particularly by the Ministry of Finance. And fiscal policy was reoriented towards supporting an ailing economy at the turn of the year. And but fiscal operations were faced with significant challenges during 2020 amidst the pandemic, And the overall fiscal outcome was weaker than initially expected. This is our key highlight of Chapter 6. And amidst numerous challenges, the government continued to support businesses and individuals affected by the pandemic to ensure a fast recovery of economic activity and return of the economy to a high growth path. But reflecting the increased pressure on fiscal operations, key fiscal balances deteriorated in 2020, thereby increasing the outstanding central government debt as at end 2020. Looking at government revenue, as a percentage of GDP, government revenue declined to 9.1% in 2020 from 12.6% in 2019. If you look at the table on the right-hand side, you see that total revenue in 2020 compared to 2019 has declined to rupees 1.4 trillion compared to 1.9 trillion at the end of 2019. In terms of GDP percentages, at the end, in 2020, total revenue was 9.1% compared to 12.6% in 2019. When you look at total expenditure and net lending during 2020, we observed that total expenditure and net lending declined due to the notable decline in capital expenditure. And when talking about the expenditure front, the Ministry of Finance made an adjustment to fiscal statistics by shifting the expenditure incurred on payments of arrears amounting to rupees 422.6 billion from 2020 to 2019. And throughout the annual report, this is the treatment that we also have followed. And accordingly, the total expenditure and net lending were recorded at 20.3% of GDP in 2020 compared to 22.2% in 2019. And recurrent expenditure rose to 17% of GDP from 16.1% of GDP in the previous year, mainly on account of increases in salaries and wages, subsidies and transfers, and interest payments. And capital expenditure contracted notably to 3.3% of GDP in 2020 compared to 6.1% of GDP in the previous year. And with these, and after the adjustment for arrears, the overall budget deficit increased to 11.1% of GDP in 2020 from 9.6% of GDP in 2020. And the current account deficit increased to 7.9% of GDP in 2020 from 3.6% of GDP in the previous year. The primary balance recorded a deficit of 4.6% of GDP in 2020 compared to the deficit of 3.6% of GDP in the previous year. And with the increase in deficit as well as the reduction in nominal GDP during 2020, the outstanding central government debt increased to 101% of GDP by end 2020 from 86.8% of GDP at end 2019. So if you look at the total stock of central government debt, that amounted to 15.1 trillion rupees. Out of that, foreign debt amounted to rupees 6.1 trillion and domestic debt 9.1 trillion. And as I said earlier, the entire stock of sovereign bonds on face value basis has been included in this total debt of 101% of GDP. So within this, the relative share of foreign debt in total debt declined to 40% by end 2020 from 47.6% at end 2019. And this improvement has reflected the expressed preference of the government for domestic financing over foreign financing, as well as the limited access to foreign financing amidst unfavorable global market conditions. And also I should again highlight that amidst adverse speculation, the government continued to maintain its impeccable debt service record during 2020 as well. Moving on to the monetary sector, Chapter 7, the key message there is that the central bank implemented an extremely accommodative monetary policy stance in 2020, focusing on lowering cost of funds, ensuring adequate liquidity in the money market, and facilitating the smooth functioning of the financial system under challenging circumstances caused by the pandemic. And as I said before, the central bank continued to relax the monetary policy stance during 2020 with a view to supporting the economy to recover from the effects of the pandemic and to regain the growth momentum given subdued inflation conditions. And several measures were taken, and those measures are discussed in a special box article in the annual report in Chapter 7. And reflecting these policies and the operational and regulatory measures, aggregate market lending rates declined to historic lows. If I give you some statistics there, the average weighted prime lending rate declined to 5.74% by the end of 2020. This was a decline by 426 basis points. The average weighted lending rate declined by 330 basis points during the year. Even the government security market yields declined by more than 280 basis points. Also a necessary evil was a decline in the deposit interest rates. We saw average weighted deposit rate decline by 240 basis points. The average weighted fixed deposit rates declining by 291 basis points. With this decline in market interest rates, we saw a gradual recovery in credit to the private sector, particularly towards late 2020, particularly after August 2020. And with that, credit to the private sector increased by rupees 374.1 billion during 2020. This was a growth of 6.5% year-on-year compared to the previous year. And within this, we saw an acceleration of personal loans and advances, and some increase in credit to the other key sectors of the economy. But we believe that there should be a push towards supporting the productive sectors, more productive sectors of the economy. In particular, the behavior of interest rates and credit to MSMEs, micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, as measured in a new survey by the central bank, has been highlighted in a special box article this year as well. And in 2020, net credit to the government from the banking system increased substantially during 2020 for obvious reasons. Once again, the central bank and the banking sector provided the necessary financing to the government to carry out fiscal operations in an undeterred manner amidst the pandemic, so that the government could support the businesses and individuals affected by the pandemic. And so accordingly, net credit to the government increased by 1,752 billion in the year 2020 compared to 279 billion increase in the year 2019. Credit to public corporations also increased by 184 billion during the year compared to 63 billion in the previous year. And with these, we observed a high growth of domestic credit, which resulted in a rapid expansion of broad money supply as well, although net foreign assets of the banking system declined. Let's quickly look at the chapter on the financial sector performance and system stability as well. And their key message is that the central bank ensured the maintenance of financial system stability by introducing several measures aimed at safeguarding the interests of financial institutions as well as those of depositors, while enabling the financial sector to provide the extraordinary support required by the economy due to the pandemic. And the banking sector exhibited a moderate growth in 2020, we saw year-on-year growth in loans and advances at 11.9%, year-on-year growth in investments at 40%, year-on-year growth in deposits at 21.6%. Also, the gross NPL ratio increased to 4.9% in 2020 compared to 4.7% in the previous year. And the capital adequacy ratio declined to 16.5% from the levels observed in the previous year. And the performance of the LFCs and SLCs sector deteriorated in 2020. We know that there are several very well managed finance companies, but overall, if you take the sector as a whole, we observed sluggish performance of the sector, reflected through the decline in the asset base, credit and deposits and profitability, and increase in NPLs during the year. And the central bank provided a number of regulatory forbearances with a view to managing the adverse impact of these outcomes on the banking sector, as well as the LFCs and SLCs sector, while enabling the financial system to provide relief to COVID-19 affected businesses and individuals. Looking at the stock market, we know that the Colombo Stock Exchange recovered from the significant decline recorded at the onset of the pandemic, and recorded a notable improvement since mid-July 2020. This was supported by the improved appetite of domestic investors for equity investment, although there were net outflows of foreign investment from the stock market in 2020. So in chapter 1, we also discuss the medium-term macroeconomic framework, giving the projections and aspirations, as well as highlighting issues and challenges. And in this slide, we have shown this medium-term macroeconomic framework that we have presented in this year's annual report. So if I take you through some of the key statistics there, in 2020, according to the medium-term macroeconomic framework presented in the annual report, we expect a growth of 6% during the year. This is mainly driven by the base effect, but also supported by the fiscal and monetary stimulus that we have at the moment. But going ahead, we expect the growth to accelerate gradually towards 7% levels, with the support of structural reforms that the government is expected to introduce in the period ahead. And with that, we expect by 2025, per capita GDP of Sri Lanka would surpass US$ 5,000. And in the external sector, we expect a trade gap of 6.2% of GDP compared to a trade gap of 7.4% of GDP. This is with an improvement in exports to US$ 12.5 billion during the year, and some increase in imports to $17.8 billion during the year. With that, we expect the current account deficit to be recorded at 0.2%, but a surplus in the current account in the period ahead if the necessary reforms are introduced. And official reserves are currently at relatively low levels of about $4.5 billion, and we expect by the end of this year also official reserves to be between US$ 4.5 to 5 billion, which would give us an import cover of 3.2 months and a gradual improvement in official reserves thereafter. For the fiscal sector projections, we depend on the Ministry of Finance, and we expect the budget deficit to decline to 9.4% in 2021, and thereafter a steady decline in the budget deficit towards 4% by 2025. With that, the central government debt is also expected to decline to about 80% by 2025, compared to the 101% levels that we are seeing at the moment. Broad money growth is expected to remain high at 21% in 2021, but thereafter around 12.5% in the medium term. Private sector trade growth is expected at about 12.2%, benefiting from the low interest rates that we observe at the moment. This should release about rupees 750 billion to the market in terms of private sector credit growth during the year. With regard to inflation, we expect inflation to remain subdued in 2021. Some inflationary pressures in the next 2 years, but with appropriate policies, inflation to be brought back to around 5% levels by 2025. And so this is the medium-term macroeconomic framework presented in the annual report, but it has to be noted that this framework was prepared at the beginning of April, and this was approved by the Monetary Board in the middle of April, and we published the annual report on the 23rd of April. And I also want to highlight the daily confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Sri Lanka. In relation to this, when the governor signed the annual report on the 23rd of April 2021, that's the point that is shown with this red line. And you can see the evolving nature of the pandemic. And obviously, this would have some impact on, particularly on near-term projections made by the central bank. Also, so when projections are required, we assure to the public that we will incorporate those projections and present them to the public from time to time. And another development that I want to highlight is that at the moment, the rebasing of GDP is overdue. It was due in 2020. And when this rebasing happens, we expect the Department of Census and Statistics to rebase GDP starting from 2015. And when that happens during this year, there will be another need to revise the interpretations of associated ratios and analysis from 2015 onwards. And we will provide our analysis when this rebasing also becomes available as well. So very quickly, if I take you through the issues and policies highlighted in the annual report, if you read chapter 1, section 5, so essentially 1.5 section of chapter 1, you see that several issues and required policies have been highlighted in this section. So if I take you through some of these, we talk about the sluggish improvement in productivity and the need to prioritize export promotion alongside taking measures to implement long overdue structural reforms, enhancing services exports, and the need for innovative strategies to keep the tourism sector functioning in the new normal, and also the supporting the Colombo port city, which will be a game changer for the country, particularly in terms of a better ease of doing business environment. We know that the difficulty in doing business has also made it difficult to attract sizable FDIs. We discussed that in this section, and also the need to improve the external current account balance and the fiscal balance to continue reversing the expansion in external debt as well. We also highlight the policy adjustments must give due consideration to the fact that the COVID-19 pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on underprivileged segments of the population, and also increasing food self-sufficiency. This has been highlighted in the box article as well. And fragilities and vulnerabilities in Sri Lanka's labor force, emphasizing the need for urgent labor market reforms, and also supporting the creation of a resilient and dynamic labor force through labor market reforms and particularly education reforms as well. And the need to support MSMEs for the generation of inclusive and sustainable growth, and also the need for the financial sector of Sri Lanka to evolve fast to cater to the emerging needs of the economy in the prevailing low inflation, low interest rate environment has been highlighted. We also highlight the need for the general public to be more vigilant of offers and opportunities promoted by various unscrupulous parties. We have highlighted the environment issues in Sri Lanka, which could damage the macroeconomic, which could have macroeconomic implications going forward. And finally, we have highlighted the need for accurate and timely data, which play a key role in information-based societies. There are several box articles included in the annual report, some of which are highlighted here, and particularly this one on improved global rankings. That is a key area for improvement, particularly to support the attraction of foreign investors, as well as to support the work of domestic investors. And there is another box article on the paradigm shift in work routines towards work from home, which has been induced by the COVID-19 pandemic. And the IT department has done a box article on the implications of the COVID-19 on technology adoption and cybersecurity. And in addition to these, the annual report provides details of the central bank operations during the pandemic, as well as measures adopted by the fiscal authorities. There is a special box article, box 10, on major economic policy measures, listing out all types of measures taken in 2020. And if you go through part 2 of the annual report, it gives plans and operations of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, detailing the work of all 29 departments of the Central Bank, and the part 3 on major administrative measures adopted by the government and the Monetary Board. That part is also quite long this year in 2020 because of the numerous measures that we have taken to support the individuals, businesses, as well as the financial sector during the year. So with that, let me thank all of you. And I would also like to thank the Governor, Deshamanya Professor W.D. Lakshman, the members of the Monetary Board, Deputy Governors, Assistant Governors for their guidance, and the Statistics Department, Macroprudential Surveillance Department, and all other departments of the Central Bank, as well as the external, public and private sector institutions for their inputs, and various departments of the Central Bank, and also the printers for logistical support. And above all, the additional directors, deputy directors, heads of divisions, and all staff of the Economic Research Department, including Dr. Harish Chandra, Dr. Sumila Vanaguru, Dr. Sujita Jagajeevan, Dr. Kitsire Halepola, Dr. Lasitha Padberia, Dr. Shanika Ratnayaka, for their dedication in finalizing the annual report on time. And as usual, we owe a big thank you to the family members of the Economic Research Department for bearing with us during this season while we work around the clock under severe staff shortages. And my special thanks to Dr. Kasan Patirage and his team for preparing this presentation, summarizing the annual report. I'm sorry it has been quite long, but if you go through the annual report, you see that I only covered a little bit of what's in the annual report. And I would also like to thank our audience who are present here today, as well as those who peruse the annual report for various purposes from wherever they are. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sekara, Director of Economic Research, for giving our viewers a very comprehensive presentation on the state of the Sri Lankan economy, challenges and the outlook. So with that, we can move on to questions. And I would like to remind the viewers, please post your questions on the chat and Q&A options on Zoom and on the CBSL Facebook page. And we have already received several questions. And let me take the first question, and that is for Governor. If I read the question, this is about the economic growth projection for this year. And the Central Bank annual report predicts that the economic growth for this year would be 6%. So with the rising COVID-19 we are experiencing now, don't you think that 6% growth for this year would be rather over-optimistic? And perhaps, sir, we can couple this question with another related question. One viewer asks, what are the best possible ways to battle COVID-19 and recover economy at the same time? Governor, you have a response for both questions, please.
The first question, Dr. Harichandra, has been addressed to some extent in my presentation as well as the presentation of the Director of Research. To repeat some of the things, we have indeed prepared these projections before the present wave of COVID expansion spread has started in its seriousness. So with these changes in the COVID situation, there is going to be bound to be certain changes in the underlying data sets and underlying conditions of the projections we have used in the annual report. We were doing our projections at a time when activity was normalizing at a very fast rate. Credit growth was happening. Credit growth to the private sector was taking place sharply, taking place rapidly. There were also rising import expenditure, prospects for export growth. The global economic recovery remained faster than expected, but all these things started moderating with the COVID-19 spread since about last few weeks. In fact, the chart which Director of Research had indicated, shown about the number of COVID cases over the last several weeks, clearly indicative of the changes that are taking place. What are the best possible ways to battle COVID-19 and recover economy at the same time? Is your next question, which you wanted me to couple with whatever answer I was to give for the first question. Indeed, the only thing is there could be various ways of looking at it and various ways of analyzing this. But my concern is that my total commitment is that both have to be done simultaneously. One cannot be abandoned for the sake of the other, because there are issues of survival of people's living standards, there are jobs, there are incomes. As a result, the economy also has to be taken care of, while at the same time looking after the people's lives through the necessary health measures. It is unfortunate that there is a certain amount of difference of opinion in the society as to how these two could be combined. I hope these differences will gradually pass away and there will be consensus of opinion coming up as to how we should handle this third wave of COVID-19. That is probably what I have to say, Dr. Chandra.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. And there are a few questions on the external sector as well. Now, as Director Research also mentioned about the decline in foreign reserves and the exchange rate movements. And if I pose these questions again, taking a couple of them combinedly, how to overcome the decline in foreign reserves and its impact on the exchange rate, and also about the measures that the government has taken in imposing restrictions on imports, and how successful have the import restrictions been in containing the pressure on the rupee, and for how long such restrictions will be maintained. And that's partly, to do with the government's response, but if one of the deputy governors have a response in general, perhaps would be useful for viewers. Maybe Mr. Nanayakkara can begin with Deputy Governor.
Hope you can see me actually.
We can hear you clearly.
Am I visible to you?
Very much so.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you very much for the questions. And actually, now if I take the first one, how to overcome the decline of foreign reserves and its impact on rupee. Actually, any country would like to maintain as much reserves as possible, but sometime the countries, even it happens to any domestic unit as well, they accumulate reserves in good times to be utilized in bad times. And I think when it comes to the Sri Lanka also, not only Sri Lanka, in other countries as well, I mean, we see some usage of reserves. And also the other thing is, given the fact that current low level of interest worldwide, I don't think that it is prudent for anyone to borrow at high rates and then maintain such a large volume of high level of reserves in order to impress some others around the world. But I think the Central Bank of Sri Lanka has taken many steps to have some standby arrangements with some friendly countries, and also some other avenues as to how and as and when we need the reserves, foreign currency, and also to be utilized as and when a need arises. Now, to overcome the decline of foreign reserves and its impact on rupee, of course. Now, what we are doing here, we basically maintain, or rather try to restrict the demand for foreign exchange, probably imported dollar demand. And I think Dr. Chandranath's presentation, he categorically highlighted the fact that in 2020 was the lowest import volume after 2010. And I think that addresses the partly provides a response to the second question also. Have the restrictions on imports been successful in containing the pressure on rupee, and for how long such restrictions will be maintained? That was the second question, Dr. Harishchandra. And I think now, as far as data indicates, the restriction on imports seems to be very effective, and we have seen substantial reduction in import volumes actually. But how long such restrictions will be maintained, it depends on the the improvements in the external sector, because this pandemic-related restrictions have compelled us to take certain decisions we would otherwise not even think of. So I think it's a matter of understanding the difficulty faced by not only Sri Lanka, but even other countries, and then sailing through this difficult time with some caution and some sacrifices. And I think the third question you asked me about what are the negotiations. There was a third question, Dr. Harishchandra, if I'm not mistaken, right?
That's right, DG. We have received some questions by email as well that we have shared with the panel. And
okay.
Can also be addressed, responded DG along with this
question. Yes. Right. The third question, if I'm not mistaken, what are the negotiations, agreements in future with countries or financial institutions to attract foreign exchange inflows, including FDIs? I think Dr. Chandranath again highlighted as to what action the government and the central bank jointly taking to attract more of FDIs. I think he has mentioned about the improving the ease of doing business in environment, and also facilitating, providing a conducive environment for investors to come and take, positions in Sri Lanka, especially given the very attractive nature of assets and other investment opportunities in Sri Lanka. And I mean, if I were to mention about negotiations and agreements and similar arrangement, of course, as it has been, publicly known, so we have some standby arrangement with the People's Bank of China, and also we are discussing with friendly countries, India, Bangladesh, then Qatar, then Oman. I mean, it's a whole, range of countries in different ways as to how we can ensure some standby arrangement. But at the same time, interestingly, the most noticeable improvement, the development is, I mean, all these years we have been discussing about the government, the sovereign going to the international market and raising money on behalf of the entire country. But now the interesting development is that since the government has taken a decision that it will not take new loans for repaying maturing loans, I think that has created a very good opportunity for the private sector to bridge the gap. And I think, having seen the opportunity, we see the private sector coming forward and then to grab the opportunity. I think especially the biggest corporates in the country, private sector companies, which have a substantial amount of their income in foreign exchange, have seen this as an opportunity for them to make use of, and then add values to their organizations while helping the country as a whole in this difficult time. I think those are the responses that I can give initially, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Governor. And there's another question on fiscal sector. And as Dr. Amarsek also mentioned, the budget deficit has expanded last year, and the BB is asking, we have had about 5% budget deficit during 2016 and 2018 period, but last year it was 11.1%. And the question is, what happened to the revenue-based fiscal consolidation policy of the government? Is it completely gone or still on? I suppose Deputy Governor Mrs. Mahinda Siriwadana would respond to this question, please.
Thank you, Harish, and thank you for the question as well. Of course, yes, there was an increase in the deficit in 2020, and it reflects two things. There was a decline in revenue, and at the same time there was a unexpected increase in the recurrent expenditures, particularly due to the ongoing pandemic situation. So you already know that the government introduced significant changes to the country's tax policy in 2019. Idea was to basically encourage the economic activities by maintaining a low tax regime in the country. However, these expectations were not entirely met given the subsequent development, particularly due to the COVID-19 and also the related development. And you can see that there was a significant 3.6 contraction was there in the economy. So that mainly affected about this expected revenue generation. And at the same time, there was an, as I indicated, overrun in the recurrent expenditure as well. But your question whether this revenue-based consolidation will take place or continue, I think the response as given in the medium-term policy framework that was presented by Dr. Amarasekar, there you can see, of course, the revenue is expected to increase gradually, but at the same time, the overall expenditure is also expected to go down. So it will be a kind of a combination of the revenue enhancing and expenditure reduction measure as has been announced by the government. As a result, the expectation is to have improvements in both the current account and primary deficit or primary account going forward. So those would be the kind of main driving forces in the future in order to basically reduce the budget deficit. So I would say it would be a combination of these two. That's my answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Governor. There's another question with regard to financial sector. Now, in the presentation also, it was mentioned about the low interest rate will attract some schemes to make advantage of the people's appetite for higher interest rates. So the question is basically, what are the measures that the central bank has taken against the pyramid schemes? If Deputy Governor Mrs. Yvette Fernando responds to this question, please.
Yes, thank you, Harishchandra. Now, these pyramid schemes, we really call them as prohibited schemes according to the Banking Act, the law, and it is prohibited to get engaged, facilitate, promote, market, or any kind of involvement is considered as a prohibited action according to the Banking Act. So from time to time, central bank receives this information. So according to the back, therefore we are supposed to look at them. And if we find that they are having these features of the prohibited scheme, then we are supposed to determine it and take certain action. So of course, from the point of view of the general public, what we've been doing is we have continuously keeping them aware of the dangers, because as the name suggests, is a pyramid. So pyramid means you have to get, the scheme will go on as long as new members are coming and getting added to the scheme. But at a particular point when it is not happening, so then there is always a danger that you are going to lose your money. So, and also we can see like these schemes are attached with some other, like maybe there are certain products and all also associated, just to show that it is not a pyramid scheme. But eventually, if you look at it, it is, you have to get your members added to the scheme. So that is how the scheme goes on. So from again, now these are being known as unauthorized schemes. So therefore, what I can request general public is, when you are informed of these things, you need to know the danger. One thing is it is illegal even to participate because it says promote, facilitate. So it's not only the person who gets involved, the person who provides some office room or the person who facilitates a transaction, all that can be considered as people who are engaged in illegal activity. So the request is whenever you come to know about this thing, please keep away because they are not real transactions that will allow you to continuously earn a stream of income against your hard-earned money.
Thank you, Mrs. Fernando. And there's another question on money supply and sort of growth in broad money. Basically, the view is asking, there's a view expressed in media that the central bank has resorted to a sort of money printing framework, whereas the reserve money has only grown by rupees 32 billion. So there is no such increase in money printing. So the viewer wants a clarification from the central bank on the stance with regard to money printing and how much money was issued to the market last year. Yeah, a similar question was raised by another viewer. Please brief us about the changes in money supply due to printing of money and the impact it made on the economy, along with changes in exchange rates. Maybe Director Economic Research, Dr. Amarsekar would respond to that question.
Thank you, Harish. I think what we have to understand is that in 2020, we faced this, as a country, we faced this extraordinary situation where we've never experienced anything like this caused by the pandemic, and the government, and businesses and individuals and the financial sector, all of them needed support. That's exactly what, as the central bank, we have done. And as far as the central bank is concerned, I think our objectives, job is to maintain economic and price stability as well as financial system stability. And what we have done in 2020 was directly in line with these three objectives. So we know that inflation was subdued. We are talking about low levels of inflation. That provided the central bank space to support the economy and the financial system. And that's exactly what we have done. And in terms of if I give you the numbers, looking at the expansion in money-related statistics, reserve money, I think in the question it said reserve money expanded only by 32 billion in 2020. That is exactly right. In the year 2020, reserve money expanded by rupees 31.8 billion. But that expansion discounts the reduction in the statutory reserve ratio that we introduced during the year. So basically, through the reduction in the statutory reserve ratio, also we pumped in a large amount of liquidity to the market. So if you look at the amount of liquidity at the end of 2020 in the financial system, it was 206.8 billion excess liquidity in the financial system, compared to 37.8 billion rupees of excess liquidity at the end of 2019. So there has been a substantial decline. And if you look at the currency in circulation also, compared to 678 billion rupees of currency in circulation at the end of 2019, by the end of 2020, this had gone up to rupees 834.8 billion. And also, if you look at the central bank holdings of government securities, that was 74.7 billion at the end of 2019. This increased substantially to 725.2 billion by the end of 2020. So all these indicated that there has been an expansion in the money stock in the economy. But from the central bank side, I think our concern is when this money drives up inflation in future. So being a central bank, we are very cautious about it, but we know that as long as aggregate demand remains below the potential levels, there is it is unlikely that there will be demand-driven inflationary pressures in the economy. And that's what we are observing at the moment. And with the third wave of the pandemic, we don't know what kind of support the economy would need. We hope that the third wave will be short-lived, as Governor stated. But as a public institution, as the central bank of the country, we will ensure that the required support is provided to the economy, while maintaining macroeconomic stability, economic price stability, as well as financial system stability. Thank you, Harish. Did I cover everything, or?
I think you did.
Thank you.
Dr. Amsir. Thank you. This is another question with regard to our plans, if there are, to go to the IMF. Again, the question is, from the government's viewpoint, why the government of Sri Lanka is so hesitant to go to IMF for funding? But there's some component related to the central bank as well. Do IMF conditions differ significantly with the economic paths CBSL has for Sri Lanka? Maybe if we broadly approach why we have no immediate plans to go for IMF funding, I think that would do justice for the question. Maybe if Governor can briefly respond to that question, it would be.
This policy decision has been taken on the basis of a careful study of what has happened over the last 20-30 years or more. During the period when we have run about 16 or 17 different IMF programs. It is true that we have not completely pursued the IMF recommended suggestions. Yet we had these programs, and there were certain general elements of those programs which run against the policy approach which the present government overall has taken for the country. As a result, the government's decision was not to go for an IMF program, but for various technical and other reasons, there is relationship going on with the IMF. There are IMF-related personnel in Sri Lanka helping the central bank and various other institutions. There are discussions between us and the IMF officials. That kind of relationship is going on. But the difference is that we are not moving into or requesting the involvement in a IMF drawn up policy framework, policy package, like the packages which we have gone through from at various times during the period from 1978-79 onwards. So that is the difference. That difference probably would have helped us achieve significant development, significant kind of self-reliant, independent, our own kind of development. But then everything has been confused, and everything has been has gone against our expectations because of this pandemic situation, which have been bothering us from March last year. So this is Harishchandra, what I I can say at this moment on the question, as answer to the question which
Thank
the
you.
viewer has raised. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. There's another technical question. Dr. Amarsekara mentioned about the sort of shifting the payment on arrears from in the government expenditure from 2020 to 2019. The viewer is asking, did the arrears figure of 460 billion include an interest component? Has there been a transfer of interest cost from 2020 to 2019? Dr. Amarsekara would respond, please.
I think Dr. Harichandra, you can respond to that yourself. But I'm sure you'll want to add to what I say. But if you look at table 6.1 of the annual report, this adjustment is shown very transparently, and you can go through this table 6.1. I'm referring to page 150 of the annual report. Dr. Harichandra, would you like to add a further explanation to that, please?
Well, I think you covered the sort of answer in a nutshell, and I don't think there's a shift of interest expenditure from 2020 to 2019. That's mainly, I think, the most part of was the capital expenditure, and some of the recurrent expenditure was on account of subsidies and transfers, I suppose, and not the recurrent, not the interest expenditure at all, because that's related to the financing, which has to be recorded in the sort of year that's incurred. If any member in the panel would like to respond to that question, if you have any further information, or else we can move on to another sort of a question with regard to the swap facility that we have obtained from the People's Bank of China. The question is the swap facility of USD 1.5 billion from the People's Bank of China convertible into dollars to be used for debt repayment, or is it a standard trade swap facility? Again, the Deputy Governor, Mr. Lankan Economy.
Yeah, I will respond to that. You know, as per the terms of the swap with the People's Bank of China, that cannot be swapped into US dollars actually. But it's not, completely stopped though, because there are three purposes that the money can be used to. The number one is enhancing the investment in bilateral investments between two countries, and then also financing the trade flows, and then third, any other purpose agreed by both the providing party and the requesting party. So that covers a broader range of utilization, provided that both parties agreed to. And that's where we are in terms of utilization of the funding, the swap facility. But as I mentioned earlier, I think we have first entered into this kind of an agreement with People's Bank of China in 2014, and it served as a standby arrangement, and we have never utilized a cent from that facility. So similarly, this one also will serve as a standby arrangement, meaning we will, make use of, try to make use of this facility-related financing funds only if there is a need arise. Otherwise, it will serve as a standby arrangement, and without utilizing any money during the period that the contract is valid for. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Governor. There's another question with regard to the rebasing plans by the Department of Census and Statistics. And the question is basically about the when that's going to be most likely, and what impact would that have on the GDP statistics that were published already. I suppose Mr. Rohan Wijasekara would like to respond to that query, please.
Yeah, thank you, Harish. Thank you for the question. Thank you. Actually, any country follows SNA 2008, and rebasing is one of the opportunities we have to correct the structural issues plus introduce a new service. Actually, last rebasing was done by census in 2015, and it was due in 2020, but unfortunately, because of the pandemic situation, they couldn't complete the rebasing. Of course, I'm sure they will complete rebasing in 2021. We have always debates about underestimations and overestimation. For example, IMF came in and estimated there's a minus 5 to 6% contraction in 2020, but we ended up in 3.6 contraction. So I think it's a continuation of improving estimation, and I'm sure 2021 rebasing will give us much more improved GDP compilation or GDP estimates. Thank you.
Thank you, Assistant Governor. Thank you very much. And so I think we'll be able to take a couple of more questions in the interest of time. So I'll be brief. There are several questions with regard to the debt situation of the country. And one particular question is on how we are going to secure the ISB payments post 2022. And also there are a few questions with regard to the real, to explain the real situation of the foreign currency debt of the country. And also there was one we were asking about, are we basically contemplating on negotiations with governments for bilateral loans, given the current situation. If we can overall address those queries, I think would be useful. If Deputy Governor Sunanyakara would start, perhaps.
Haris, Dr. Haris, would you please repeat the questions? My apology for.
Right, the questions are DG now. So, what are our plans to secure the sovereign repayments post 2022? That's
okay.
one. And also,
Right.
broadly speaking, what is the real situation of the foreign currency debt of the government, and what are our plans to secure forex inflows? Are we going to have sort of negotiations with other governments for bilateral financing facilities and all?
Thank you very much for the questions, and also I am a little bit disappointed also about the questions, because the whoever who asked the question seems to be seems not having faith in the Sri Lankan economy. You know, I mean, anybody, I mean, you need to look at the cash flows. Now, if you really look at the amount of debt we paid in 2020, and we haven't gone to the market, and then if you deduct that from the reserves, then we shouldn't have reserves at levels Dr. Chandranath has discussed about. And then similarly, going forward also, we are going to rely on our inflows and outflows, the cash flows. I mean, it's the position with regard to a country, so as an individual also. I mean, if you look at any person who's going to take a banking facility, he doesn't have savings to make the entire outstanding debt obligation, but he earns money and he has a future cash flow, and then basically the cash flow should provide should facilitate repayment of obligations while investing for the future. So beyond 2022, of course, I think if you look at the government policies, especially augmenting the export-oriented domestic economy, then also increased foreign direct investments, and then resorting to non-debt creating flows, I think all these things will definitely provide much needed the cash flow in servicing the debt obligations. And also, I think the government and the central bank also echoed the government's position as the agent of the government, that the government has clearly mentioned that it has no intention of increasing the foreign currency debt obligations going forward. Gradually, it wants to bring it down so that it will rely more on domestic financing. And there's another section to the question, Dr. Harishchandra, if I'm not another part.
Yeah, that is Deputy Governor, with regard to government's plans to secure for it. I think you have already sort of covered in the previous response what the government is intending to do.
Yes. Thank you.
I think we can only have one question, and so that is basically about the role of the central bank. And the VV is asking, do you think that the job of the central bank at present is more difficult than it was some 10 years ago? And can the central bank alone handle the spiraling inflation? Do you think that the central bank should reverse course and reassess on any of its current policies? And I think this is a very broad question, and the governor would perhaps like to respond briefly on the role of the central bank, and has it been more difficult now than before?
As you mentioned, the general question. In any case, my period in the central bank is limited to only a little more than a year. So I have no intention of comparing what the central bank has done in the past and what it is planning to and going to do in the future and is being engaged in now. That comparison is beyond me, but the central bank's role has never been played, I think, alone. The central bank has always been working. My feeling is that this is the case in any country, has been working with the government in power. The central bank, by separating itself from the rest of the government, would not be able to do its job properly. So in that sense, the question which has been raised, whether central bank has to change course, whether the central bank can do it alone, to me, rather irrelevant questions. We will be working with the government, and the relationship between the fiscal and the monetary authorities and the monetary policies will have to continue even in these difficult times. This is the general kind of answer which I can give to the general kind of question that has been raised.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And if any member of the panel would like to respond to any of the questions that are seen on the screen, no. Right. if that's the case, I think we have come to the end of the webinar today. I would like to thank Governor, Deputy Governors, and Assistant Governor and Director of Economic Research for your contribution to conduct a very productive webinar. Let me also thank all our viewers for joining in and posting questions, which helped this webinar to be very interactive and insightful. And last not least, many thanks to the Center for Banking Studies for organizing logistics for the webinar to flow smoothly with least interruptions. So with that, we end this webinar today, and goodbye to all of you, and stay safe. Thank you very much.